everybody. Welcome to another episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. Zach here as always, and with me is Matt. How you doing, Matt?
Doing great, man. I mean, I'm getting a little more free time in my life now that I pulled the plug on all of my incubators and racks and cages, and now the free time begins, which in this life, who knows what you can fill it with.
So. Exactly. So are things down for brumation now, or are they cleaning out for brumation?
A little bit of A and a little bit of B.
Gotcha.
You know, obviously some of the pythons that I do have here and boas and tropical species of colubrids, they're still up, but a majority of the collection is pretty much cooling down for the winter break here.
Gotcha. Yeah, mine. I'm not quite to pulling the plug. I had that trip to Kansas, which I'll be talking about here shortly. And it was 10 days. And I thought when I was going into it, I'll just use the 10 days to clean everybody out, you know, kind of logical. And then I got back and I looked at a couple of my, my king snake females and thought, yeah, you need one more good meal before I feel comfortable doing that. So I'm going to start that process. They had their meal. They're actually in the process of cleaning out now, but they'll be down for brumation, hopefully by November 1st, which is the day I always shoot for. So, yeah. But no, crazy things going on as always. Last episode, I alluded to going away. That's part of the reason why there's a bit of a larger gap between this episode and our last episode. But I headed off to Kansas in search of western hognose snakes to get pictures of them, and more importantly, get pictures of habitat, get pictures of everybody there, and to grab some data. And 10 days in the field was awesome. I found the two students went with me, Alex Schmacht and Aaron Allison. We ended up finding 35 different species, and we didn't find a western hognose snake. So It's like, Jesus, holy Christ. So anyway, it was all good. In the end, we got 3 dead on the road Eastern hogs too, which, you know, 6 of one, half dozen of another. But we did confirm habitat, and I got all kinds of good data and on where they live. I got temperature data, early morning, mid afternoon, late at night, right at sunset. Took UV radiation readings, did some soil analyses. So when it comes time to write up the Western hognose snake natural history section, I got it covered. But I'm not giving up. That herper thing, not finding the target still stings a little bit. So I'm already planning my next trip, which will happen in May. But I will not be putting this book out to print until I have found a freaking Natricinaes in the wild. That's now a personal rule. So, yeah, that's that. And then I got some snakes in. Matt Dove, got a box from him today with a bunch of Nerodia in it, and everybody that listens to this knows that I'm a Nerodia maniac. So diamond backwater snakes and some red bellies. And yeah, that's basically my update. What's new with you?
Well, I actually got some snakes in today too. Kind of an interesting aspect of it was one of my friends is going through some health issues, and I ended up acquiring probably every mandarin I've sold him since 2010, which was quite the group of mandarins. So over the past couple of years, I've kind of phased out Chinese mandarins, and I've actually now brought them back into my collection. So bringing back in some of the original Sichuans, as well as Hunans, and some of the different selective breedings that Carl Krumke had done in the past too as well. So that's kind of exciting. And I acquired a pair of Ridley-eye, which is interesting too on a personal note, because I had sold the gentleman a pair of these probably 5 years ago now. And they're the first snakes he's ever bred in his life, and he wanted to gift me a pair of them because they've brought him so much joy over the years and kind of reclaimed his persona for the hobby, which I really don't need more Ridley-eye, but I mean, the aspect and how that kind of circle around, I thought was very cool to actually see, especially in the hobby that we have. So, and then,
Oh, I mean, that speaks volumes about you, man. So keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, you got to have fun with it, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we're all in it for the right reasons. What was it? A week or two ago, I brought Maggie to her first reptile show for NERBC.
Mm-hmm.
So she got to see that. There weren't many colubrids there overall. I was actually kind of shocked to see that there really weren't many corn snakes even
Really?
presented. Um, your classic pets, crested geckos, ball pythons, boas. There was a select few here and there, but I was kind of shocked to see that we weren't seeing more colubrids presented in the overall area, maybe because of the time of the year, because a lot of the stuff has already been claimed and
Mm-hmm.
identified. But it was always good to see some great faces, including Clint Bartlett, who grabbed me and gave me a big hug and kiss. So
Oh, there you go.
yeah.
Can't ask for anything bit more than that. Yeah. I was when Tinley was going on, I was supposed to be flying home, but I got caught up in part of the airplane issues that everybody's having, and our flight out of Wichita was canceled. So I ended up spending an extra day in Kansas. But Dan Sheehan was like my eyes on the ground in Tinley, and I was kind of hoping I told him what I wanted him to keep an eye out for, and I was like, I don't need any more snakes. And sure enough, he sent me a message that had the most beautiful, though very obese, blotched king snake, goinai, big female. I have 2 adult males, so I actually had a Tinley pickup, and I wasn't even there. So
Yeah, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Well, even the flight episode there with all the cancellations, I remember going back to the hotel on Saturday with Maggie, and there was probably over 200 people in the lobby.
Oh my God.
And obviously every hotel was sold out in the area because of everything else going on, as well as limitation of rooms, occupancies, and
Mm-hmm.
it was very interesting to say the least.
Yes. Did Maggie like the show?
She did. Towards the end, we walked around. She wasn't really seeing what she was looking for. And any child 8 years old starts to get a little bit antsy and wants to leave at that point in time. But she did get a pickup, and not only an animal, but she did get another pair of tongs from Robin from Redline Science.
Nice.
She was eyeing those solid gold ones, and Robin was gracious enough to gift her a pair.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. All righty. Well, anything else to report before we jump into this?
I don't think so. I think we're pretty much caught up with most of our housekeeping.
Yeah. Well, let's
here.
just dive right in. So today we are heading over towards the Colubroid angle of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio with our very first focus on a Natricine group. So we're going to be talking with Rob Shea, who is the garter guy on both Facebook and Instagram, correct? Yes. And obviously, I've alluded to this a lot. Natricines, Thamnophis, Nerodia, those guys, they're my faves. I know that I talk about false water cobras a lot, and they are my favorite species of snake. But as far as my personal favorite group of snakes, love my Dipsadids, but Natricines have always done it for me. And I thought, we really need to bring on somebody to talk about Natricines, and somebody who basically claims to be the garter guy is the guy that we should probably bring on to do that. And I have a pair of Lake Chapala. I think I'm saying that right. I might be saying it wrong. Garters that I purchased from him, as well as, I don't know which lake these ones are, but they know if it's Equus Scotti. And they're freaking phenomenal. They're growing like wheat. In fact, they're probably growing faster than any snakes I've ever had in my life, to be honest with you. So we're going to bring on Rob today, and we're going to basically do all things garter snake. And then if we have time, we might hop into other things. But, I have no issues with this being garter snakes the entire time. So without further ado, Rob, welcome to Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
I'm glad to be here, guys.
Yeah. So we have a bit of a format that we follow, keeping our inspiration from NPR. So tell us a little bit about your story. How long have you been doing this? Has this been a lifelong thing? Is this a recent development? What got you into herpetoculture?
So definitely lifelong. I remember being a little kid and my dad telling me about when he would go out and he would catch hognose snakes and king snakes, and here I am like 5, 6 years old. And it made me want to go do that, obviously. So I remember going out in the woods and flipping a million logs. And just one day I found a ringneck snake and it blew me away. And I was hooked ever since then. So yeah, I've definitely been in the hobby for many, many years. Kind of backed out of it for a while. I was in the Marines and I traveled the world. Obviously, I kind of had to back out for a little bit, which kind of stinks because some of the garter snakes that I had don't even exist anymore. As far as the morphs, yeah. I had they're called silvers. I got them from Scott Felser, and they just disappeared. Who knows what happened to them? But yeah, I kind of got big back into it about maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, and I've just been loving it ever since.
Awesome. So one question we ask is basically tell us just a little bit about your collection now. Obviously, you have the Thamnophis, but are there other snakes in the midst, lizards, turtles, or are you just a snake guy? Like, where do you fall on that?
So I love all reptiles, to be honest with you. I've gone through a lot of things. At one point, I had snapping turtles. I had a big collection of dart frogs at one point. They're a lot of work. They're awesome, very rewarding, but they're a lot of work. But currently at this time, I'm just working with probably about 90% garter snakes and then about 10% other colubrids. But just the garter snakes alone, they take up a lot. So
what kind of eccentric brought you to garter snakes, I guess?
So there's a lot there. What I always loved about them was you don't need morphs. You don't need any morphs at all to have absolutely every color and paint job you can think of. And then on top of that, they're one of the few species that cohabs very well. They're not like king snakes where they're going to immediately latch on to the first snake they see. You can keep them in groups and you can actually keep different species and subspecies depending on size together in groups. Obviously, you don't want to mix sexes for obvious reasons, but that and the fact that they do well in bioactives, which I really love. They do really well in there. They're extremely active. I mean, if you give them any kind of UV, they're going to utilize it. They love it. They do well with water schemes. They do well with just about anything. And being such a diverse colubrid that isn't too big really appealed to me. So, I mean, granted, I have some species that get very big, including the Scots garter snakes that I you got from me. They get big, but I'm sorry, they get big in terms of garter snakes. Let me clarify that. But yeah, don't be surprised if they get 46, 48 inches on you.
I would love that, to be honest with you. So on this same line of thought, with why garter snakes, if we were to kind of make this more broad, this is a question that we love to ask all of our guests. So you can do the garters, you can do your milks and your lamps, and you can also do pythons, boas. Like, what about you makes colubrids it versus pythons, boas, all that kind of stuff? We're trying to define what a colubrid keeper is, if there even is a definition. So why colubrids? Why do you not have the pythons, boas, things like that?
Well, they're the best.
That's a common answer.
Honestly, I think what it is for me at least is, I don't think that there's even really a close second. Well, with the exception of venomous, is, there's so many just phenomenal color options out there. I mean, between patterns and fluorescent orange and blues and yellows, and I mean, very, very few other geniuses are going to really offer that. And granted, some Colubrids do get big, but most of them they're under 6 feet for the most part, which is much more manageable. I think a big limitation that a lot of keepers have is space. You know what I mean? Granted, if I could have every room in my house with the exception of my bedroom full of snakes, I would. Unfortunately, I can't do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they're the best,
Good answer. So we can dive into to garter snake husbandry and care and all that jazz now.
Okay.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about is and this was definitely something that I liked, and you've already alluded to it, that kind of drew me to the garters last spring when I kind of had my little epiphany of I want to keep what I want to keep, and I want to keep things the way I like to keep things. And I enjoy naturalistic keeping. I enjoy bioactive keeping. But it seems like the garter people, if you will, kind of have their standards of care, which are unique to garter keeping. Like, for instance, you see a lot of glass aquaria being used or exoterras being used. And, with other groups, if you mention an exoterra, you're going to get flamed and destroyed. With garters, it's kind of almost like the standard norm. And I think it'd be cool to one of the things that we want to do with this podcast is dive into the different subcultures of colubrid keeping. So what do you view kind of as the garter starter? Like, what makes garter keeping different compared to other colubrids, and what's the why behind it?
All right, so that's a great point. Almost all of my garters right now are in glass aquariums, and I hope that anybody that listens to this podcast that they take what I'm going to say seriously. And the reason for that is, garter snakes are not like other colubrids. They love to get wet. They love to go in their water bowls and get out, and go in their water bowls and get out. And I experimented with the tub thing when I first started, and I keep other colubrids in tubs. But when you have a snake that's constantly getting everything soaked, and they're in that tub, you're not getting the ventilation. Everything's going to get too wet. It's going to cause skin issues. It's going to cause upper respiratory infections. So there's ways to combat that, obviously. I mean, if you chose to go that route, but me personally, I've just always found that it's easier to keep them in, a tank with a ton of ventilation on top. I almost exclusively use cypress because of how absorbent it is. If you use aspen, which is fine, a lot of people do, especially with some of the more aquatic garters like the equis. They're constantly going in and out of the, and everything's just going to get soaked all the time. So what I found was best for them was to use, cypress, very well ventilated tank, and a UV bulb, which they absolutely love. Every single species of garter snake that I have loves them. Increases their appetite, makes them really active. I mean, if you turn it on in the morning, because they're a diurnal species, at nighttime they disappear. If you turn on that UV bulb in the morning, within 15 minutes they will all be out, literally hunting. It's awesome to see. With that said, everything that I just mentioned, naturalistic and bioactive enclosures fit within that. You know what I mean? And I think because of that, that's the reason that that the garter community, if you will, has really adopted that. And it's aesthetically pleasing. It's awesome to look at. I have a big 100-gallon tank in my house right now, where I have a bunch of Lake Chapala garter snakes in it, and they're always basking. They are always crushing the plants, but but they're always either basking or they're soaking, and just what they do. So it's not to say again that people can't keep them in tubs. If you do, I would just highly recommend that you have just a ton of ventilation, because if not, I've just seen, me personally, I've done a lot of trial and error over the years, and I've seen so many of them come down with, they're really so susceptible to URIs from being too moist. It happens so much, and then I've taken those snakes that are having, they're wheezing, and I blast them with UV in a dry environment, and I never heard wheezing again. So it's just that particular genus. That's just the way that they like to stay. And again, I'm not bashing the tub guys, because I do keep other colubrids in tubs, but them in particular, I just think it's really best for them.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. Now, you have far more experience than me, but I can say that I tried the tub thing for a very short period of time and got blister disease
yes,
immediate.
Exactly, right.
It was like within 48 hours.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even really, this was not long term. This was me coming up with a quarantine situation. And I thought, well, I don't necessarily have an extra exo to set them up in, so I'll just burn a bunch of holes in this tub, get the ventilation where it needs to be. And even that wasn't enough, because like you said, they were in the water, then they were in the mulch, then they were in the water, then they were in the mulch. They never got dry, and then I got the blisters. So that, yeah. And I can definitely second. I have I have Oregon red spotted garters in a naturalistic enclosure. And that is without question, the 60 snakes at my house and all their different setups. It's in my office. They're in a 4x2x2 big PVC that I did put extra ventilation in, but they've got UV and all that kind of stuff. And they're just always doing something. Like, I find myself, it's the only Viv I have where I'll just sit and watch them, because one of the three girls is always doing something.
Yeah.
They're just kind of, that's why I like them, is exactly what you hit on. It's the fact that they're just, if you want a snake that's not going to hide and is going to be out and inquisitive, all right, well, this is it.
Yep.
And you're absolutely correct with the colors. One of the things that I from Kansas, I got to see the red-sideds in the wild. And I'd seen them in shows, and I've seen pictures of them, and but we just must have been where like the stellar Kansas red-sideds were. And I put a picture up on my Instagram and went so far as to say, like, these things are cooler than scarlet king snakes. And I've caught both now, and that's my personal opinion. But like the coloration of these animals, I don't know how everybody doesn't have them, based off the colors. And I'm not advocating don't go out to Kansas and catch a red-sided garter snake. We've got plenty of people breeding them. But just when I was in Kansas, we caught so many snakes when we were out there, and the flipping garter snakes were the ones that the students were like, Dr. Loafman, you got to get back in the car. I'm like, I can't put this thing down. Like, this thing's freaking phenomenal. So, no, I just don't think that they get anywhere near the credit that they deserve. So, as far as keeping them's concerned, what is the day in a life of a garter keeper? Because I can definitely say that is where they diverge dramatically, is that the husbandry and seems to be very different than your classic rat snake, king snake, feed them a mouse once a week, you're done. So kind of entertain the audience that might be thinking about garter snakes, of what it is to be a garter snake keeper versus a rodent eating colubrid keeper.
Well, you brought up a very good point. My king snakes and my milk snakes, my rat snakes, it's so easy. I get my tongs out, I feed them a frozen thawed pinky or mouse, and that's it. And then a week later, I do the same thing. Garter snakes, it isn't that easy. So personally, what I do is I use fish. They absolutely go crazy for the scented fish. And I mix them with rodents, and they just destroy everything. What I'll typically do, because I feed in groups, garter snakes love to fight for food. They will literally have a giant plate of food in front of them, and see another snake in the corner with a little tiny piece of mouse, and just go to the other snake and try to steal that piece of food. It's hilarious, but it's also annoying. So, so if you do cohab, you do have to watch them while they eat. Personally, I love doing it, because I love them. So it isn't something that's as quick as, here's your mouse. No, you do have to observe them if you're going to keep them in groups. Something that I want to touch on with that is, and I was guilty of this for a long time, is people love to feed their garter snakes live fish. It's absolutely awesome to watch them hunt. I remember having litters of garter snakes, and they're 2 days old and they're hunting guppies, and I could watch it for hours. It's awesome. Don't do that. Do not feed live fish if you don't have to. I've lost too many snakes to live fish from parasites. Go the frozen thawed route. Absolutely. I've even seen people just today asking where they can buy tadpoles or live frogs. Don't do that. They will destroy them. They love them, and it's awesome to watch them hunt. But it's just, it comes with too many problems later down the road. And as I'm sure you guys know, parasites they'll be dormant for a long time, and then they'll just pop up out of nowhere later. It's don't do it, please. And another thing with garter snakes, and I'm sure everybody knows this, is they love to poop. They love it, especially when you pick them up. And a lot of my photos, you'll see I'm wearing gloves, and there's always somebody who says, "Why are you wearing gloves? You're afraid to get bit?" No, I'm not. A garter snake's not going to hurt me, obviously, but they are going to poop on my hand quite often. Or they're going to fling it at me. They're actually amazing at doing that. I don't know how, but yeah, I don't know. But as far as keeping them versus other species, particularly when it comes to feeding, you're gonna put a little more work in, especially when they're first born. On this podcast, I've heard people talk about colubrids being small. Until you've seen a newborn garter snake, you have not seen a small colubrid. I'm talking 3 inches long, just so thin. The good thing is that they're very willing to eat almost immediately, within a day or two, almost all the time, not always, but so yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
no, that's what we want you to do, man.
Yeah.
Hey, Rob, real quick, talking about feeding. When I kept garters while I was doing my master's, actually on spatial habitat use of Thamnophis hortalis, I would always mix in calcium and vitamins. Do you do any sort of supplementation for the animals with your food?
I have, especially with newborn, or if I've gotten a snake come in that's malnourished. To touch on that, when I said that I feed fish, I don't feed fillets. Obviously, it's just protein. There isn't really a whole lot there. I feed the whole fish, whether it be silverside or trout, and I'm putting everything in there: the head, the guts, the eyes, all the above. I'm getting the full nutritional value. I mean, technically, you could just feed fish, and you wouldn't even need to feed pinks or any kind of other rodent if you want about that way. But that's what I do regardless. With all my snakes, I'm using the whole fish. That way, you don't really have to supplement. But when I have in the past multiple times actually, especially with snakes that have come to me that just were captive bred, so. But yeah, that's normally what I would do. Full fish.
So I see a lot of people feeding worms, and being the zoologist that I am, I know that worms carry worms. That's the saying. Like, they are loaded, and they're oftentimes intermediate hosts for all kinds of crazy.
You're 100% right.
Is the worm a no? Is it a yay?
It's a hard no.
Hard no.
It's a hard no. Yeah, I actually had somebody messaging me today asking me about their diet, and he was asking me, should I use night crawlers? And I said, as a last resort, if the snake just, if you don't want to force feed and it's not eating anything else, because for whatever reason, night crawlers are a crack to garter snakes.
Yes.
They go crazy for them. I don't care if it's a garter snake from Guatemala or from, northern Canada, they all love them. So, maybe use to scent. But no, you're absolutely right. I've lost snakes for that, exact same thing. I'm 100% frozen thawed everything that I feed them from the time that they're born and until the time they're adults, or I'm shipping them off. And I actually tell everybody that. And a lot of people, and again, it's so fun to watch them eat, of this annoying worm that's going crazy, or a guppy or a minnow, but don't do it.
So where do you get your whole fish? Do you do this online, or are you fortunate to have like a market that you can go to?
I'm very fortunate to have a mom and pop fish shop, exotic fish shop right down the street from me that is constantly selling silver sides. I have bought store whole trout in the past, kind of blended them up in a blender. It's kind of gross, but they love it. But yeah, no, you can order silver sides online, frozen. They will come right to your house. It's kind of the same concept as using, Rodent Pro or any of those other sites.
And so, when you get the silver sides, are you when the snakes get big enough? Are they just eating an entire silver side, or are you still
easily.
cutting them up?
Easily.
Yeah, okay.
My Lake Patsy garter snakes, she's eating 3 or 4 of them. She's diving in and grabbing several of them at once and destroying all of them. Yeah. So. Gotcha.
Cool. So with the babies, you mentioned that they're small. What is specific to their care? So kind of walk us through, how often are you feeding? What are you feeding? What's kind of a normal growth rate? Just kind of the ABCs of baby garter snake care, because I got to experience this over the past couple months, and I was not prepared for the willingness for these little boogers to eat. Because it just seemed like they were never full.
Yeah, you're right.
So,
well, that's actually a very, very good question, and I get that a lot as well. It does vary a little bit between the subspecies of garter snake, but they have an insane metabolism. They will eat every day. I don't feed them every day, but probably every third day I'm feeding them, and they don't gain weight. They don't get fat. They just grow, and they grow very quickly, which I guess from an evolutionary standpoint makes sense, considering how small they're born, that they would grow quickly. Yeah. But yeah, if you're feeding your baby garter snakes the same way that you feed other species, they're just not going to make it. And you're gonna say to yourself, why does the snake keep losing weight? Why isn't it thriving? Why is it becoming lethargic? You have to feed them a lot when they're first born. After about a year, obviously you can cut back, feed them every 7 to 10 days. But as babies, they're nonstop hunters. They will eat, especially the Scots garter snakes. They are psycho eaters, probably because how big they get and how fast they have to grow in the wild. But yeah, it's very important to feed them often and feed them nutritional food. Don't feed them worms. Don't feed them guppies, because they will also eat guppies almost 2 days after they're born. They're very sight oriented. Anything moving, and they're also very scent oriented, which is probably why they're such great hunters. But yeah, no, if you do have garter snakes, whether you get it from me or anyone else, don't feed them live food, and feed them often, and they will thrive for you. I spoke to someone today, actually, about baby garter snakes, and she said to me, somebody mentioned to me that they have a high mortality rate, and I said to her, well, that's because most of the ones that are coming to the hobby are wild caught, or the person that had them prior to you was feeding them goldfish. Okay, don't do that.
Yeah.
You know, always ask these three things is what I said to her. You know, are they captive bred? Unfortunately, you can't trust everyone when it comes to that.
Yeah.
You know, what have you been feeding them? Hold on. What was the other thing I said? I'm having a brain. God. Oh, wrong person. I got a lot of messages today.
There you go.
Oh, here we go. Okay. Oh, have you ever fed them, you know, amphibians or fish live at all? Don't buy them because they're going to present issues later on in life. And the other is, you know, how many times have they fed? A lot of breeders, for whatever reason, they'll push out garter snakes after their second or third feeding. Don't do that. They have big litters, you know, depending on the subspecies. I just had a valley garter snake that had 26 babies.
Holy crap.
I personally will wait until they've all had 10 meals at least, you know, until they're thriving. The last thing that you want is to get a snake that you think is thriving because it had a meal and then push it out. And I won't do that. So I always ask people to ask those three things, you know, how many meals have they had? What have they eaten? And are they captive bred? And I think that those three things alone will help anybody that's looking to purchase baby garter snakes.
Hey, Rob, just going back real quick on care of neonates. Do you keep them communally?
I do, yes.
Then?
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's weird because I'll put them in a tank and I'll put 5 or 6 hides in there, and they will all be in the same hide. You know, I don't know if it's a comfort thing for them. I don't know if they developed, you know, if they developed it as like an anti-predation thing. But they will always stick together when they're babies. As they get older, they'll kind of go off on their own. But yeah, the only thing is again, you know, and I had alluded to this earlier, is when you feed them when they're groups like that, cut your pieces of food very small because that way they'll eat them real quick and they won't fight over the food. Helps a lot.
Yeah. No, it's funny you talked about the communal aspect of these animals because normally cohab is like a dirty word in herpetoculture, but it definitely is an accepted practice with Natricinaes. I cohab the water snakes I have, the Neurodia, and I know that the other guys that take care of Neurodia do the same. There was a manuscript that was published, maybe it was 2019, maybe it was 2020, I don't remember when, but people actually tested to see if garter snakes had what in pop sci circles it was published as like garter snakes have friends, but basically what the reality of it was is that garter snakes show a very high kin selection, so they're basically able to recognize their siblings, and there's something with this group of snakes where being gregarious and hanging out together and finding good habitat is part of their general biology.
Wow.
So the fact that they're all hanging out together is exactly what you would expect to see based off what the scientists who did that, you know, project showed. And they went so far as to show that there were basically different groups of snakes, and they tried to force snakes from group A that form naturally with group B that form naturally. And in that situation, they would stay in separate hides. But if they gave them the option to go back to their original group, they immediately became gregarious again and went back to their normal group. So this is definitely a group where the science shows that the cohabbing's fine. So one of the things that I noticed with my animals, I want to see if you've noticed the same. This was more with Neurodia than with the garters, but they are closely related, is I was raising up a litter of broad-banded water snakes together, and my feeding responses were like off the chain. And then I separated them all out and started feeding them. And, you know, initially they didn't really eat well. And I thought, okay, it's the stress of moving. And then like 2-3 weeks into this, they were eating, but they weren't eating. And I decided, you know, this isn't good. So I kind of put them all back together again. And that competition, I think, drove their feeding responses through the... Have you observed the same thing?
100%. Yeah. And I think competition was the right word there. because, like I said, there'll be a big pile of food right in front of them, and they'll notice a snake hiding, behind a plant with a piece of food in their mouth, and they will drop what they have in their mouth to go try to take that. Yeah, I think it's definitely a competition thing. They'll grow quicker that way, and their feeding responses will be insane if you do it that way. So, yeah, it's fun to watch, but again, it's something that you do have to watch. Cannibalism it's extremely rare with most Natricinae actually, but especially with Thamnophis. Almost every time that I hear somebody say, "Oh, my garter snake ate this other garter snake," well, it didn't eat that garter snake. It latched onto the piece of food that garter snake was too stubborn to let go of, and they just kept going with it. So, yeah, it's definitely a competitive thing with them, for sure. But as long as you keep an eye on them, I think it's fine.
So then, as far as your husbandry is concerned, and we talked about the glass aquaria and the ventilation and the bedding. What are we doing for heat? Are these critters that you can keep ambient, or do they have a basking site? If they've got a basking site, what is the basking site temp? Is there a standardization? With those kind of with those juveniles and adults, when you get to that level of care, what's the setup for them versus what you would be keeping your neonates in?
So, garter snakes are extremely cold tolerant. They will die much quicker from being overheated than they will from being cold. Which is why they're found all the way up in northern Canada. Personally, what I do is I use UV, and that's it. I don't do anything else, and they really don't need it. They really thrive at room temps. And that comes into play with a lot of things for them. As far as shipping, I won't ship if it's hot. If the night temps are going to the 30s, they're completely fine. I actually cool them at around 38 degrees for about 3 months, and I've never lost one while cooling. They're an extremely cold tolerant species. So as far as the heat goes, I really wouldn't use any belly heat. I would either go room temp or I would just go UV with them, and they really, really just thrive there. Room temps is what they're best at. Similar to a lot of Asian colubrids. So yeah, if you're thinking about keeping them really warm, I wouldn't do that. There are some species of garter snakes that do like a little warmer. The Thamnophis scalaris and scaliger, but they're also found, really high elevations in southern Mexico where it's extremely dry. So yeah, there is exceptions, but I wouldn't go too hot with any of them. Even the scaliger and scalaris, I wouldn't do that.
Interesting. So with your UV bulb, is it a 5.0? Is it a 10.0?
I think I use a 5.0.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, they just really don't need it that hot. I think that they really appreciate the UV more than the heat itself. And they've really thrived for me like that. I've actually had snakes that were too stubborn to get off of belly heat and just died. Yeah. So I stopped using it completely. I haven't used belly heat in years. I'm 100%, I'm a pro UV guy. They really, really love it. So, and it affects their behavior too. Become way more active almost immediately. It's interesting to watch, and it's 100% every single time. So, but like I said, there are some exceptions. As far as there are some that like a little warmer. I do keep my scalaris they have a warm spot of about 90 degrees. Which they'll bask in the warm spot after they eat or when they first get up in the morning. But aside from that, they're at the room temp side all day.
Interesting.
Yeah. One of the coolest things I ever saw was actually garter snakes on top of snow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it was probably the coolest thing I ever saw when I was doing some of my field work in the middle of December, going out in northern Illinois and seeing garters just sitting on those different areas right on the snow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. That's why, a lot of people they ask me about about their cooling cycles, and they'll tell me they have them at 50 degrees and they're still moving around. They look like they're losing weight. No, that's not going to cut it. You got to cool them cold. You got to go below 40 degrees is what I've learned, or even just around that 40, 42 degree mark. I know a lot of people they don't have fridges that will get that cold, which I have a wine fridge. It only gets down to about 46. They seem to do okay there as well, but the majority of them go right in my garage. It gets down to about 38, 40 degrees, and I sit them there for about 90 days. They come out, and within hours, they're cording.
Yeah.
It's very, very effective. So,
very interesting. So, with your bioactive setups, do you have a particular substrate? I mean, you said cypress. Do you add anything to the cypress, or is it just cypress?
So
cleanup crews. Like, what's going on that front?
So for my for the majority of my tanks, I use cypress. For my bioactive, I just use soil. I use just black soil. Just springtails in there. Garters don't really seem to mind them. They do, as I said earlier, they do poop a lot because they eat a lot. They have crazy metabolisms, and they're eating fish too. You know what I mean? So they are going a lot. It's pretty easy to clean though. Especially in the bioactives, especially with the cleanup crews. The only thing that you really have to worry about as far as that goes is when you're keeping a bunch of them together, especially newborns, is you got to keep them clean. I mean, every single day, I'm changing their bedding because they're constantly eating and they're constantly crapping.
Yes.
So kind of like a baby. So
like that.
Yeah.
Hey Rob,
yeah.
Off of talking about setting up natural vivaria, do you let those cages establish for a certain amount of time before introducing? Okay. Could you go into a little bit about that? Because I think sometimes when we talk about bioactive, people think, oh, I can just throw in a couple of springtails and I'm good.
No, especially when you have really active snakes that like to just destroy everything. So what I personally will do is I'll wait at least 8 weeks. And really, you should wait longer. 8 weeks is almost kind of rushing it. I'll plant. I keep a planted section, and then I keep a hide section with all my cork bark and my other things, and my water feature, whatever that's going to be for that tank. Get plants that are well established. You got to water them a lot, but just don't rush. Just take your time with it. Just let them grow out. The last one that I did in my 100-gallon enclosure, it was like a rainforest. It looked amazing. But then I put the snakes in there, and they pretty much just, they destroyed it. I'm not going to lie. It's ruined now, but they still love it. They tend to hang out more in the planted area, which is weird to me. Probably because that's where the UV is. But yeah, no, that's a great point. Don't rush. If you're going to do that, take your time with it. Put your springtails in, or your isopods, or whatever cleanup crew you want to use, and let everything establish on their own. I've been guilty of that many, many times, and they just uproot everything because the roots haven't established into the soil yet. So yeah, take your time.
Awesome. The Oregon red spotted Viv, I accepted that these things were going to destroy the plants. That was, I went into it with the complete understanding that I needed replaceable plants. So I have, my wife wants to kill me, but there's just pothos growing everywhere in our house. So I just basically grab a new sprig of pothos, put it in there, and the poor thing's going to be dead in a month from the perpetual, slithering over top. And then a new one goes in. But this last one actually has established, and I'm kind of shocked they haven't killed it yet. So, yeah, very cool. So, were there plants in particular that you think might be snake proof? I mean, granted, this is the Lake Chapalas, right?
Yeah.
Like, these are not small garter snakes. These are the beasts of the garter snake world.
Yeah,
so.
all the equies are, but I use plants that are lower and wider as opposed to plants that are going to grow up, because garter snakes are not they're not in a braille. They're not a climbing species, but they love to climb at the same time. Just like, they're not really a fully aquatic species, but they love to swim all the time. So any kind of plant, any kind of fern, anything that's lower to the ground, that's going to spread out and grow, wide. There was one that I wanted to start using. What is it? Fig. Oh God, I can't remember the name of it.
Creeping fig?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend who she completely saturated her enclosure with it, and it looks amazing. And they don't seem to really be destroying them at all. Yeah. But if you put any kind of fancy, high growing plants in there, they're gonna crush them.
Yeah. No, that's cool stuff.
Yeah.
All righty. So we've covered. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, real quick. Talking about water features. Do you do any sort of active water filtration for the animals?
No, I just changed them out. I change the water out probably every 2 or 3 days. That's something that I am looking into doing in the future. That's like I said, I kept dart frogs in the past, and I did that in every single one of their enclosures. And that's a lot of work, and a lot of time, more than work. So. But yeah, that's something that I'll probably do in that one big 100-gallon setup that I have.
Very cool. So let's kind of segue over to breeding. When it comes to breeding them, is the standard recipe of feed, fall, cool them down, warm them up, breed, or is there more to it than that? I mean, you've already alluded to these guys need to get colder than most snakes during brumation. So
they kind of stop feeding on their own around this time of year, like a lot of colubrids do. Really, the only thing that they want to eat is worms, which I won't give them. So once they go off feed naturally, I usually wait about 2 weeks, and then I'll put them down. I always wait a little longer than most people because of their cold requirements. Some people will cool them now, for space reasons and stuff, which I completely understand. But I'm usually from about December to about the beginning of March is when I bring them out. And again, cold. Don't let them freeze, obviously. But garter snakes, one of the things that they'll do when they're cooling is they'll completely submerge themselves in water for weeks at a time. They won't come up at all. Their oxygen requirements get very low when they're that cold. They've been found in lakes under ice for weeks at a time, completely. They're alive. It's crazy. So I always give them a big water bowl, and wherever I put them away, and obviously, I have to check on them. Every time I check on them, they're either hiding or they're all completely submerged.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
I would have never thought to give them the bowl to submerge it.
Yeah. They'll actually dry out. So yeah, definitely give them that.
Interesting. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. But they're pretty easy. As soon as you take them out, like I said, they're going to start courting almost immediately. Another thing that they'll do, some subspecies, is they'll actually court now at this time of year, and they'll retain sperm. And as soon as they come out, a couple weeks later, they're dropping litters. So I've seen that as well. Yeah, multiple times actually. So, and another thing that garter snakes like to do is they like to double clutch, sometimes triple clutch, especially the equus subspecies, the Mexican. I actually don't cool them, by the way. I should mention that. Their winters are about 70 degrees. So it wouldn't really make sense to cool them the same way that I would the, Thamnophis totalis. They're, up in northern Canada. Another thing with that is a lot of people will ask me, at what age should you introduce your males and females? The Thamnophis equus, they ovulate more than any snake I've ever seen. And what will happen is if you don't have a male in with them, is they will slug out. And I've seen it happen at 2 years old. I've seen it happen at 2 years old, where they'll start passing slugs. And I was keeping a group of females together, and I'm like, oh crap. So I started keeping the males and females together. It's not always, but I've seen it actually on numerous occasions now, where they will literally slug out at 2 years old. So if you have groups of them, I would introduce them at around that age.
At 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
But they're going to grow. You'll see. They're going to grow very, very quickly for you. Especially the Scott eye. They're going to get 45 plus inches. And they're known for swimming, vast distances, miles across lakes. Probably the reason they got so big. But yeah. So definitely do that if you're going to breed them.
So with the Obscurus or the Chapalas, the Equus guys,
mm-hmm.
do they kind of do a cycle with the cycle of your house where just your ambient temperature drops by default in the wintertime? Are you doing any kind of cycling with them, or is it just keeping them year round?
I'm keeping them at room temps.
You can drop at any time.
I'm keeping them at room temps. My house does get a little cooler in the winter, and their feed will slow down a little bit. But they're normally giving me a clutch in early spring, and then around this time of year, late in the year. It's very, very common. This year they all gave birth around the end of July, which was new. I had a bunch of young females this year that did that, but generally they're double clutching for me at room temps, spring and early winter, late fall. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Hey Rob, real quick, in terms of breeding success and communal keeping, do you keep multiple males with your groups of females to stir up any sort of male combat that's known in garter snakes too as well? Have you observed anything of that nature within some of the specimens that you've kept?
So that's a great point. A lot of people, when they want to breed, what they'll do is they'll buy, one male and 2 females. And what I found with garter snakes is that the opposite works better. You put 2 or 3 males in with 1 female, and they will all just get on her. It's a competition thing. Like you said, they're a very competitive species. They will all be on her. And I've noticed that my success rates doing it that way have been much, much higher, as opposed to having 1 male and multiple females. So, but if you keep multiple females and males together, you'll just get a big breeding ball. It's an orgy. We'll call it what it is. It's an orgy, and it happens a lot. So,
which is probably one of the coolest things with Manitoba.
Yeah.
And garter snakes.
Yeah. I've observed basically a smaller version of that several times. So, Pretty cool.
All right. So then, as far as breeding's concerned, they're relatively straightforward, would you say, or not?
Yes and no. Again, with the northern species, cooling them is very important. Making sure that they're at a good weight prior to cooling them, obviously, because they're not going to eat for 90 days. But when you look at the southern species, it's I would say that the most important thing is, and it's really just this simple, aside from their husbandry and everything else, is keep them together. Because, like I said, the females ovulate more than any species of snake that I've ever seen, and they will slug out. Once I started keeping males with females year round, the problem just went away. I haven't seen it in probably 5 or 6 years now. It's really been a high level of success for me.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So really, there has to be some sort of evolutionary attribute that has taken that bite to really breed throughout the year, potentially, for the retention of sperm, so that when ideal conditions are met, they're ovulating and ova are.
Yeah. Well, garter snake mating systems. That's its own dedicated podcast episode, man. the Manitoba snake.
Oh yeah.
Then I teach that stuff in herpetology, and there's males that come out that imitate females and can create pseudo pheromones, and then they like lure other males away, and then they dart back and date and mate with the females. It's just nutty what the hell these snakes do. That's part of the reason why I find them to be like absolutely fascinating snakes. But I digress. So we've kind of covered husbandry a fair bit. Let's just dive into species. If that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know you keep a couple.
Yeah.
So you mind just kind of listing which species you work with, and then we'll pick a handful, maybe the species that are kind of unique or more different from each other, and then just kind of dive into what makes them cool, why you have them, morphs, all that kind of good stuff.
All right. So the first species that I'll talk about is the Thamnophis sirtalis infernalis, or the California red-sided garter snake. So the reason that I talk about them first is because they're the most popular, especially in terms of people who've never worked with garter snakes. They're neon blue and they're fire engine red. They're amazing.
Yeah.
Really, the only snake that's better looking than that is the San Fran, but obviously, they're federally protected. You can't touch them in the United States. So what a lot of people will do is they'll have their first pet be the California red-sided garter snake. Don't do that. Okay, they're not a great pet. I'm just going to put it to you like that. They are out for blood constantly. They love to bite you. If I tap on the cage, they're striking at it. If I lift their enclosure, they're going crazy. And they are the poop snipers. Okay, they will fling poop on you. I've had it on my face. Just don't do it. Okay. However, they are probably one of the most beautiful colubrids in North America. They're amazing. So they're more of a display animal, is what I would say. I do work with 2 localities of them. I work with the original Scott Felser line of the neon blue, as he called them, and I work with Napa Valleys, which really the biggest difference is that the Napa Valleys have blue heads as opposed to the traditional fire engine red. But yeah, they're all crazy. So I'm working with probably F15, F20 at this point, and they're still just that crazy, no matter how much you handle them. And then let's see what's next. I work with some Eastern blacknecks. They're if you don't know what they look like, Google it. They're an absolutely beautiful species. They have a neon orange stripe going down their back with a phenomenal pattern. I actually had mine imported by Frank Hughes in Germany. His line was just absolutely just stellar, especially in terms of that that neon glowing orange stripe. I also work with a lot of snakes from Europe that I got from Stephen Boll. He is he's a biologist from Holland. He kind of brought a lot of, especially the Mexican species, he brought into the hobby decades ago. He's imported a lot of the stuff into the U.S., which I'll talk about all that in a minute. But I also work with plains garter snakes. In terms of the garter snake hobby, they are the morph guys. There's just a ton of morphs with them. You've got 3 strains of albino. You've got the reds. You've got the blue exanthics. You've got the black and white exanthics. Some scaleless were just born. There's a form of leucistic. It's called pearl. It's almost like a paradox, if you will. They're white with it's almost like a reverse piebald, if you will. They're really awesome. What else is there? There's and then there's Aztecs, which they basically have no pattern at all. They're just completely striped. Right? Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. They're awesome. So if you're into morphs, you don't need to be if you're into garter snakes, because there's so many different types of colors. But if you're into morphs, that's really what you want to get into, is the plains garter snake. Um, what else do I have? I have the blue striped garter snakes, which are they have a very very small range in the United States, but they're extremely abundant in that range. They only exist in Dixie and Levy County in Florida.
Yes.
They're basically they glow blue. Um, they're absolutely beautiful. They're one of the species that I've seen the mating balls with several times. They, again, very, very prolific breeders and really, really just stunning to look at. And then let's see what else. I used to work with the Eastern garter snake, which has the biggest range in North America, the Thamnophis sertalis. There's a lot of morphs in there too. Really, really stunning. The flame, the Erie, the albinos. There's a morph out there called diffused. There's a lot of argument back and forth about whether or not it's anery or not. They basically are born looking completely normal, and they turn black and blue as they age. It's a pretty interesting gene. People are still learning a lot with it. And then that brings me to my Mexican species. I talked earlier about Stephen Bowl. He's a great guy. He's one of the most meticulous record keeping guys you'll ever meet. He just every litter that he's ever hatched, he knows who has them or where they went. He's a great guy. A couple decades ago, he started importing some Mexican species into the United States from Europe. The Thamnophis equis was one of them, which I really found to just be, amazing because of their size. They're huge. I have a garter snake right now that's as thick as a soda can. She's about 45 inches long. She crushes large mice like it's nothing. I also have the Lake Chapalas, which you're already aware of. They have neon blue bellies as adults. They're absolutely beautiful snakes. There is an albino morph in there, which is very rare in the U.S. I think there's only 1 or 2 people working with that. And then I have the Lake Cutio.
Yes.
So recently, I produced a litter of them. There's been several of them that have come into the United States over the years, and I've just, using this breeding method, I was the first to produce them in the U.S. They're how can I describe them? They look like indigo snakes.
Yes.
They're the indigos of garter snakes. They are almost a melanistic form of the equis with blue bellies. They are also prima donnas, though. Yeah, they are very very robust species, but they're not very friendly. Most of my other equis are dog tame as adults. My Scotties, I don't know if you know this, by the way, but Scotties hold the record in terms of length, with the exception of the Thamnophis gigas,
Yes.
or giant garter snake, which is also federally protected, which we can't own. But they get very, very big, and they're they as adults they have a robin egg blue belly. They have a lot of really vivid greens. Very, very aquatic. If you give them water, they will use it. They absolutely love it. And then probably my favorite garter snake is the Lake Patskill garter snake. They're dog tame, and they're just massive. Like I said, that's the one that I was referring to. That's about as thick as a soda can. The head on this thing, when people see it, they're just like, that's not a garter snake. They're kind of blown away. I think my female is about 46 inches right now. Male is significantly smaller than her. But he gets the job done. He's always courting her. He likes big girls. There's nothing wrong with that. So, but yeah, they're pretty awesome. And then there's one more that I wanted to mention. It's the Thamnophis scalaris. It's the long-tailed alpine garter snake. They are the exact opposite of every other Mexican species. They max out at around 18 inches for females. They're very small. However, they are insanely variable. I have fire engine red. They blow the eastern flames out of the water. I have one that's yellow and maroon. I have one that's almost completely gray and black, and then I have your typical brown. Nobody's produced them in the United States yet. I'm really hoping that I'm the first to do that. They're really another very, very active species. In terms of species numbers and subspecies, there's I believe it's 35 species of garter snakes with an additional 60 subspecies. So it gets pretty complicated pretty quick. They can be
Yep.
they can be easy to confuse with each other if you don't know what you're looking at. But you have everything. You can have your small snakes, you can have your bigger snakes. If you like your snakes blue, we have blue. If you like your snakes
Mhm.
red, we have red. If you want to morph, we have morphs. We have a little bit of everything when it comes to garter snakes. So I think they're really an underrated species because I think that for a long time there was a stigma, whereas I
Yeah.
can catch garter snakes in my backyard. Well, you can catch that type of garter snake in your backyard, but you can't catch the one that only exists in a small area 3,000 miles away in your backyard. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
but obviously people, the average person doesn't realize that there's dozens of species of garter snake, and even with ribbon snakes, it's the same thing. I've worked with ribbon snakes. That's another form of Thamnophis. Very, very high strung species. Stressed really, really easily. It's one of those species that's a better display animal. But they get very long. I know people think ribbon snakes are small. They get way bigger than people think.
Oh no, they can get way big.
Yeah.
I did a trip. Since we're talking about garter snakes, this is relevant. So there's kind of the garter snake manual, which was by Siegel, Ford, and Rosman. I think it's called The Garter Snakes, published in like the late 90s. And Neil Ford, who was a professor at UT Tyler, who did a lot of work on garter snake reproduction for science. He called me out of the blue one day, actually emailed me to come down and talk to the college about crayfish because he wanted to start studying crayfish. And I got this email from him, and I'm used to that, but I was like, wait a minute, isn't that the garter snake guy? Because I'm, have my start in herpetology, and
That's awesome.
I wrote him back. I was like, are you the garter snake guy? He was like, oh yeah, that was another life. I was like, no, holy crap, the garter snake guy's asking me to come. So of course I went down, and we went out into the field, and we have eastern ribbons here in West Virginia, and they're actually one of our rarest species. And I've only seen like 2 or 3, and then I did grad school in Florida, where there's the I think it's Stamnophis auritus saccani, I think is the Latin name, and those were like what I envisioned ribbon snakes to be. And when I was with Ford, we were in these wetlands outside of Dallas, Texas, and we're walking around, and he's like, "Oh, there's a ribbon," and I was like, "That thing's not a ribbon. It's like 3.5 feet long and big around as a pill bottle." And it was a ribbon. So they do get, like, I was shocked at how freaking big and how beautiful they were. They were this like sky blue, just all. They were so damn fast we didn't get our hands on any of them because we were trying to catch them in the middle of the day, and they totally had the advantage. But I actually wanted to talk a little bit about ribbon snakes because I remember growing up, late 80s, early 90s, and you'd go to the pet store, and like the kind of obligatory pet store snake were ribbon snakes that were imported up here out of Florida. And I've watched the kind of garter snake thing blow up over the past decade. And I'm not saying people don't keep ribbons, but it seems like if there's a garter snake community, there's an even smaller community in the garter snake community that's doing the ribbon snakes.
Yes.
Is the reason that neurotic nature of them, or is there some kind of care aspect? Because I don't really feel like I rarely see captive born ribbons available. Now you go to a show and the importer tables are still loaded to the gills with wild caughts.
Right.
What's the story on the ribbons? Because I know there's people that would be kind of curious about that.
So ribbon snakes are a lot like garter snakes in terms of their colors. There's a lot of really cool ones, especially down in Florida, like you said. There's the blue striped ribbon snake.
Yes.
They're like black with almost like a clean neon blue stripe. They're beautiful. You've got the locality you were talking about of the western ribbon snake in Texas, which is a beautiful sky blue with a red stripe. Then you have the red striped ribbon snake, which is also in Texas. They're green with a nice clean red stripe. They're beautiful, but they're just one of those species that just never calms down. They're extremely flighty from the time that you pick them up. Ribbon snakes do something too that garter snakes don't do, which is really fascinating to me. Is they put on a display. When you pick them up, they will open their mouth and kind of go back and forth, which I always found to be awesome. When they do that, they're going to bite you. So put them down. I learned that the hard way. But they're just so high strung. It's a species that if you do choose to work with them, I would recommend giving them a big spacious enclosure and just not touching them. With the exception of obviously having to check on them, make sure that everything's okay. But it's one of those species that they're very, very high strung, almost like the Infernalis or the California red-sided garter snake, very, very similar. But if you're willing to put up with that, they are beautiful. They're huge, and they're great eaters as well for the most part. I guess if you're willing to put up with that, then yeah, go for it.
Yeah. No, I just caught Western ribbons when I was in Kansas, and looking at a picture in a book and then holding the animal in your hand, I was pretty damn shocked at how awesome those Western ribbon snakes were. That orange stripe that they have going down the back, and we found a couple that had the orange stripe and were just solid jet black with like a yellow venter, and they were awesome. The garters were what kept me going, by the way, when we found a dead hognose snake or didn't find a hognose snake. So anyway, so is there any, we've kind of given the impression that that the care of these guys is pretty much the same across the board, and with the exception of Scaliger and the more tropical species needing to be warmer.
Yeah.
For those North American taxa or anything, is there any kind of like just species specific quirk other than the fact that Infernalis wants to kill you?
No. I mean, they're pretty similar across the board in terms of husbandry and the way that you keep them. I've never really found that any one species is too much different than any other, with the exception of once you start getting south of the border and stuff like that. They're pretty much all the same. That's
all right. So if someone were to get into garters and they want to jump into this group, how do they get started? Do you start with a baby? Do you recommend starting with a well-established juvenile? Obviously, contact a breeder, work with a breeder. Do not get an imported snake or go to your backyard. We're not about that here. Plus, there are laws, and you don't want to be breaking those laws by any. I mean, even in West Virginia, great example, our new herp regs say that you can't bring a snake from the wild into your house. So little Jimmy catches a garter snake and brings it in. 1 year ago, that was totally legal. Today, it's not. So, plus you don't want that parasite-ridden example. So do you have a kind of, I hate to say garter starter pack, but at the same time, you got to get into this thing. What do you recommend someone who might be a king snake keeper? How do they get into garter snakes?
So if you've never kept really small colubrids, I would probably recommend that you start with like a sub-adult or an adult. I mean, the babies are simple enough to keep. And, in terms of husbandry, it's no different from an adult to a neonate. Really, the only difference is that you're going to be feeding them a lot more. And so, if you like interacting with your animal and you don't mind feeding, 2-3 times a week, then that's fine. But in terms of, difficulty, I would, obviously I would say that it's easier to keep an adult, but I think the most important thing, and you touched on this, is stay away from anything wild caught for so many reasons. You don't want to bring snake fungal disease into your house, or crypto, or any of these other collection killers. You know what I mean? It's just not worth it. So if you see a snake that's $40 versus a snake that's, $150, and one of them looks like it's covered in, blisters, don't take the cheaper route.
No.
don't do it. I see a lot of things for sale now, and I don't understand how these people are even getting away with it, to be honest with you, because you're right. There are so many laws out there, but I absolutely go captive bred. Don't even waste your money, because the snake's going to be dead in 6 months anyway. You know what I mean? The parasitic load is just, it's just going to take off, and then your snake's going to be dead. So there's no point. Definitely contact a solid breeder. The biggest wealth of knowledge, or the biggest group that I would say, is the Thamnophis page on Facebook. There's a plethora of breeders from all over the world, from Europe, from North America, from Canada, from the United States, from everywhere, that have really solid backgrounds, that are breeding, several generation deep garter snakes. So, absolutely go that route. Anybody, if they want to send me a message, I'm Garter Guy on Instagram, please. I literally talk to random people all day. Just today alone, I had multiple people ask me about husbandry and feeding. I don't mind chatting with random people, but do research, make sure that you're willing to feed fish, and, chopped fish, to be more specific, and chopped pinks, because a newborn garter snake is not eating a full pink. It's not. So recognize that you're going to have to cut up that pink into smaller pieces. It can be a little gross. That's why a lot of people prefer to do fish. And as long as you're okay with all those things, they're an absolutely phenomenal and rewarding species to work with. What other species can you take 5 or 6 of them, put them in a big cohab environment, you know what I mean, and just have 5 or 6 awesome different paint jobs in there? You can't really do that with a lot of other species. So I think in terms of that, they're really great. But my biggest advice would be, don't rush into it. Don't buy anything wild call. Ask the breeder, So.
And Rob, even going off of that, do you have any recommended books or websites that people listening to this should maybe check out too, outside of the Facebook page?
Zach brought up a phenomenal book earlier. Problem with that book is it's very rare now and hard to get. I've been looking for it myself. But yeah, that's why I mentioned that Thamnophis page every day. There's people asking for advice, and not to bash any other of these snake communities, but we're not like the ball python community. If you come in there and you ask us questions, we're going to be friendly. We're going to help you out. Especially with the uptick in garter snakes recently. There's so many people now that are asking about them, and that's perfectly fine. We're here to help. So don't be afraid. Join us. We're a community.
All righty. So I think is there anything else you want to cover before we jump over to Lampropeltis? Because we have some time to do that. I think we covered everything you would want to kind of get the ball rolling. But and congrats on that, first time breeding in North America.
Thank you. Yeah, that was actually the second one that I had. I produced the Lake Patskill last year. I was also the first to do that. So
yeah, the Equus group, just to kind of go before we leave the Thamnophis, they're just a fascinating group of snakes. From a truly nerdy natural history perspective, taking the herpetoculture out of it. The fact that we have them available is phenomenal. But if you kind of like the whole Sky Island rattlesnake deal with the Lepidus and the Mitchell-eye and Price-eye, the midget, the various dwarf rattlesnakes that live in Arizona and New Mexico. This is like the exact same thing. It's just with a natricine, and they're all isolated to these volcanic lakes in southwestern Mexico. And there's an amazing paper if you want to get into it. And you message me, and I can get it to you. But if you do a search, you can usually find. I found it without too much effort, but one of the gods of North American herpetology, and he was a garter snake nut, Roger Conant. He wrote a monograph late in his life and published it, and it's just on this group of snakes. And what's awesome about this paper is that he did a collecting trip in the 60s, and then at the end of his life in the early 90s, he actually wrote it up. So you get to read, he's talking about his field notes, and there's pictures in this paper from 30 years before the paper was published, and he talks about conservation issues and all that. But at the time, subspecies were really, that was kind of the norm for snakes. I would not be the slightest bit surprised if somebody actually got in there and we were able to do the work in Mexico, that if you were to do some molecular phylogenetics, that these are all independent taxa, because there's no gene flow between these lakes. They're completely isolated. But, just to add a little bit of nerddom to this thing, that's what, I think's great. And I have the Obscurus, and I have the Scott Eye, and I have a pair of each from you. And then I've picked up some additional Obscurus from some other people. And just looking at the Scott Eye and the Obscurus, I have a really hard time accepting that those are the same species. I mean, they are
very different. Yeah.
Different. They're different in behavior. They're different in their morphology, and they're different in their paint job. So, no, that's one of the things that I love about these things, is that they're kind of, they're great. When we went to Arizona in 2019, when we could do things like that, we were hiking around the Chiricahua Mountains. Most people are happy when they find a Crotalus lepidus, a banded rock rattlesnake. And we came down into a creek, students and I, and there were black-necked garter snakes all dove into the pool. And I was like a 10-year-old. I went in the pool too. And I came out with 3 or 4 of them.
Oh, wow.
We found a blacktail rattlesnake right before that. And I was way more engaged in nerding out over the black-necked garter snakes than the molluscus that we found. So, I'm definitely on Team Garter when it comes to that kind of stuff. All right. So Rob keeps other things too, not just Thamnophis. So we were chatting, and let's just kind of go over the Lamprepeltis that you keep. And then I want to do a dedicated deep dive on your speckled king snakes, because at least I can live vicariously through our discussion, because ironically, once again, back to the Kansas trip, 35 species. On the way to Kansas, I said there are 2 species I really want to find on this trip. I want to find a western hognose snake, and I want to find a speckled king snake. And a speckled king snake and a western hognose snake are literally the 2 things we didn't find. So we can talk about Holbrook Eye on the podcast, and maybe that'll count somehow for me. But I can get the Holbrook Eye later. But anyway, so what lamps do you keep?
So one of my favorite snakes, period, is the black milk snake. They're born looking similar to an Andean milk snake. They're born very big too. And they go through this dramatic color change, for those who don't know, where they end up turning jet black as adults. And it's almost like you have 2 pet snakes in the same snake. It's kind of awesome. I don't know if you've ever held an adult black milk snake, but they are about as fragile as a hammer. I mean, they are solid muscle, and they're really an interesting species. They're another one that likes to cool. And what's really interesting to me about them is I don't know if you've ever seen one in person.
We have them here at the school.
Yeah, so they have very small heads.
Yes.
Which I think is so cool, because they're such a robust, muscular snake. But they have these little heads on them, and they're really, really interesting looking. I have a 2018 pair. I'm hoping to breed maybe next year or the year after. I know there are species that is really slow to mature, and they're one that you don't want to rush. So I have high hopes for them. What's really interesting too is how they aren't all the same in terms of how they change. I have the Limon locality, if I'm saying that right.
That's what we have.
Okay, yeah. So my female, she's holding on to a lot of her. I'm sorry, my male, he's holding on to a lot of his red. It's really it's kind of wild looking right now, where he's jet black and then he has red scales coming through. And they're so tame. I've never ever had one try to bite me. I've never ever had one poop. I mean, it's just a complete 360 when it comes to the Thamnophis. They're just dog tame. They're absolutely phenomenal eaters. They're really a rewarding species. Shockingly, they're not as common as you would think. I'm not sure why. It's probably because they take so long to reach sexual maturity, and people just aren't patient. That's what I would assume. But yeah, they're really really a great species. Another one that I work with, which is pretty much the complete opposite in terms of everything, is the pale milk snake. I work with the Cherry County locality. They are very very small, and they are crazy. I think my adult female is around 18 inches, and my male is around 16 inches. They're absolutely stunning. I mean, they're fire engine red with a clean white background, really almost bone white, and phenomenal eaters too. If you put any pinks near them, they go berserk. But a very very small species. If you're not, they're actually smaller than Thamnophis. So if you're not really willing to deal with that, they might not be for you. But they're an absolutely phenomenal species, and they're one of those species that's kind of locality driven. There's multiple localities of them, and recently, I believe Cole Glover, he just produced the first hypo E. That'd be the correct term. Reduced red. I don't know if that's the correct term. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Yeah, I know Cole. He's got a great collection too.
Yeah. Mine actually came from him.
Okay.
Yeah. He's a good guy. Yeah. I also do work with the Depi or Depi, from the original Vivid line. Awesome, super colorful pine snake. Great eaters. Insanely variable. I mean, no two are like. I don't know if you've ever seen them.
Yeah.
They're, I almost my big male right now. He's basically has a flame orange tail, and he's got a white top half. Absolutely incredible looking species. For whatever reason, they're more rare than other species in the U.S. I don't know why. I guess there just hasn't been an influx of them. Because of the laws and everything. But they're another great species.
And then the speckled king snakes.
Yeah. So the speckled king snakes are.
Let's hit on them for a bit.
Okay. So speckled kings they're very locality driven. Yes. Whenever you get one, they're going to say, oh, they're from this parish in Louisiana, or they're from this county in Texas, because they all look slightly different. I guess they're all in their own isolated little pockets in terms of of pattern and color. I work with the Harris County, which are they're amazing. They're born black and yellow with a really red orange belly that kind of goes away as they age. And they have a lot of pattern as well when they're born. Into adulthood, they will lose all of their pattern, and their bellies will turn almost completely yellow, just a clean, beautiful yellow with a lot of speckling. They are another species that is an absolutely ferocious eater.
Yes.
Oh my God. And it doesn't matter whether it's quail or any kind of rodent. They crush anything that you put near them. Almost really from the time they're born. I remember when I got them, they were, 6 or 7 inches long, and they were absolutely crushing pinks that I was putting in there. They're another really rewarding species. Very easy to keep as well. So
yeah, they're relatively bulletproof, correct?
Yes. Yeah, they're extremely hardy. I mean, they're from, you're finding them in arid deserts in Texas. and they're thriving out there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've recently gotten into the Getula group.
Mm-hmm.
I've decided that that's going to be my snake to keep at my house for the simple fact that when I get home, I'm so damn tired that I just want something that's going to work.
Yeah.
And I over the past months, I've acquired. I have a bunch of locality Florida Kings now, and I have one pair of Easterns that I was able to kind of grandfather in with the regs in West Virginia. Black King snakes are actually my favorite of the group, but they're in West Virginia, so I can't keep them now. I just picked up OBX Kings actually this week. Thank you, Dan. But the one that I've decided that I'm just going to be choosy on are the Holbrook Eye, the specs. And I've seen pictures of yours, and they are a little bit of an inspiration to get Harris County, Texas.
Yeah, they're great.
Animals. They're pretty phenomenal. Are those? Do you have adults? Are you still raising them, or
they're adults this year? They're just finally big enough to breed. So I'm hoping this spring that I can pop some out. So
well, keep me in mind if that happens, because it seems like with the speckled kings, you can. I see them at the local shows here more frequently than I thought I would, but they're almost certainly wild caught.
Yeah, a lot of them are,
and not all speckled kings are created equal.
Correct.
So I think that line breeding for the color phase that you were talking about is something that we can all do. And the Harris County animals have been around for a while.
Yes, they have.
Correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's pretty cool. You can't beat a large, stocky, bulletproof colubrid. Like, it just doesn't get.
That's why I love black milk snakes, because they, they're as bulletproof as it gets.
Yeah, the Limon locality, those were some of the very first snakes that I acquired for our collection here because of what you mentioned. I knew that we weren't going to have to do any kind of real supplemental heat for them, and that if we ever had, God forbid, electricity blow in the wintertime with a snowstorm, that I would kind of have a little bit of a cushion to get them to where they needed to be. But correct me if I'm wrong, the Limon, they're not known for being enormous. There's other localities that are the big guys, because ours are adults now, and I got them when they were hatchlings here back in 16, and they're sitting at about 4.5 feet. But I've seen pictures of black milks online that are like 6.5 foot beasts.
Yeah. Well, black milk.
Do you know anything about where they come from?
I believe they came from the San Antonio zoo stock.
Yes,
if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's correct.
The thing about black milks too is they'll keep growing up to 4 or 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So they're a very slow growing species. Their color change happens relatively quick in comparison to how quick they grow. Within 2.5 years, a lot of times they'll be jet black, depending on the line or the locality, but they'll keep growing for a while. So a lot of people they'll be disappointed. They'll say, "Oh man, he's only 3.5 feet. He's not done growing." He's 3 years old. He's got another solid 2 years of growing. So,
yeah, no. When I took my students to Costa Rica, literally in March of 2020, as the world was closing down. We flew out of Costa Rica 48 hours before they shut the border down. It's too bad we couldn't come up with something to keep us there for 49 hours, so we wouldn't stuck there for the pandemic. But anyway, we had a kid that got hurt, and we had to get him to an emergency room, and we went to Limon. And the entire time that I was going there, in the back of my head, like, this was my first time in Costa Rica, I kept thinking, like, I know this place. Why do I know this place? And then I was sitting in the hospital waiting room, and I was like, this is where our milk snakes came from, because that's the locality for, and it was kind of cool because it was on the Gulf side, and we came out of the coastal forest where it was pretty damn hot, and where we were, it was actually cooler than the rest of the areas we were in. Another fun fact about black milks is when we had our crypto outbreak, which I'm very public about, our black milk snakes popped positive for crypto, but they were asymptomatic, so they never really showed the bulge. And then we had one start to regurgitate, and we started treating all of our animals with parabomycin, which is an antibiotic. The Bronx Zoo did that with the king cobra, so we did it. And we had 2 snakes that we were able to show with PCR by taking their poop and basically looking for crypto DNA in it. That cleared the crypto.
Wow.
And one of the 2 species that we were able to clear with the paramycin were the black milk snakes. They actually responded very favorably to that treatment. I am not a vet. Don't do that. I'm just simply saying that that was kind of a neat observation in talking about how they're bulletproof. They got one of the most insidious snake diseases, and we were able to actually kick it.
Wow.
With them. We were also giving them paramycin every 72 hours for 6 months. So, unless you can do that, don't think that this is a magic treatment. But no, they're badass animals. Their taxonomy is a little crazy. They were known as Lampropeltis triangulum gaige.
Yes.
And then they just became Lampropeltis microfolus.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. And wow. Microfolus absorbed taxonomically Andeans, the black milks, and there were a couple others that I don't know because I have Andeans at home as well. And that was kind of a bitter pill to swallow. But genetically, it is pretty sound. And Hondurans are the other one. I think they're Lampropeltis abnorma or something like that. But no, cool. So are the lamps and the depot, are they a nice distraction from the perpetual poo show, the Thamnophis and the always cutting things up?
They're very easy, Yeah, it's definitely a nice break. It's nice to have bigger colubrids too. You know what I mean? Things you can hold like that. But yeah, no, I'm always gonna love my garter snakes. But yeah, it's definitely a nice change of pace. Especially in terms of feeding, it's just much easier. I don't have to cut any fish up. I don't have to cut any pinks up. Just put them in there, and I'm done. Easy peasy.
Okay. So to kind of wrap our awesome. This has been fantastic, Rob. What's the future hold? Are there taxa you're looking for? Are you happy where you're at? Not that we necessarily promote always getting something, but you totally possible to reach an equilibrium. But
you might need to get some more exoteras.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a few species of equus that I would still like to get. And there's one species that for me has always been kind of like the creme de la creme. And it just recently became available in Europe. He's had them for a while, but he's just recently been successful with litters. It's the gold-headed garter snake.
Yes.
That's
a cool one.
They don't even look like a garter snake, for me to be honest with you. And with the exception of, in terms of size and body and head shape, but they have a yellow head and they have no stripe. They're black with white stripes down their side. Just an absolutely phenomenal, really, really rare snake in the hobby. I would like to own them one day, but right now I'm happy where I'm at.
All right. Fantastic. So any final thoughts, Matt? Are we?
No, I mean, the only thing that I would probably add to this is just purely, if you are interested in garter snakes, make sure that you actually do look up your local laws too as well. Because in some states they are restricted, and it is something that as we perceive as a hobby and grow as a hobby, we just need to make sure that we're paying attention to the legal system of keeping some of these animals. So if you're interested in garters, I think it is something to pay attention to. Same thing, like when we talked about black rats, it's the same system too as well. So.
Great point.
Yeah.
All righty.
Play by the rules.
Play by the rules, people. If you play by the rules, we're not going to get new rules. So that's kind of how that whole thing works. I have one more question, just to, out of pure curiosity, since you are a Natricine guy. So I love my garter snakes. I also love my Nerodia. Is there a reason why You don't have Nerodia in your collection? Is it because you don't like to bleed freely while being pooped on?
So I kept Diamondback water snakes for a while, and they were insane.
Yeah.
They were actually more bipolar than insane. I would pick them up and they would be great, and then out of nowhere they would be out for blood.
Yep.
I kind of got tired of that. Beautiful snakes to look at, but yeah, no, they are crazy. Yeah.
And that's why I love them. So, it takes. I had somebody tell me once it takes a special person to like Nerodia. And I just kind of looked at him and was like, I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult, but we're just going to roll with it. That's part of the reason why I like the Equus guys so much, because Conan actually talks about this in that paper. They kind of are the water snake garter snake.
Yes.
Like they get as big as Nerodia. They act like Nerodia. Like my Obscurus, they're the Lake Chapalas, are always in water, like you were saying. And Conan went so far as to say, like, they kind of are the perfect intermediate between our classic view of a garter snake in North America and our view of Nerodia. But if you're one of those people that want a bigger garter and you like the kind of aquatic aspect of keeping these guys, you can't go wrong with the Equus. They're pretty phenomenal. I'm totally on their team when it comes to promoting garters. And Rob is the guy to go to if you want some. So, well, I guess that wraps things up. So if people want to find you, we kind of alluded to this at the beginning, but how do people get a hold of you, Rob, if they want to reach out and find
just message me on my Instagram, Garter Guy. Pretty simple. Yeah, you can't really mess that one up. So I'm there.
Alrighty. Well, this has been fantastic. I'm certain we'll have you on again in the future. And yeah, this wraps up. I don't know what episode we're on, Matt. Is this 5 or 6 ish?
6?
Yeah,
6-ish.
We'll go with that. So thank you for listening.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah. No, thank you. It's been fantastic.
Awesome.
And like I said, we'll have you again. But thank you all for if you made it this far. Thanks. As always, reach out, let us know. We're still getting good feedback. Matt and I are kind of shocked at the number of people that we are getting feedback from. So we're kind of reaching our goal, which was to make an impact and get people thinking about the husbandry of this wonderful group of animals. I have a request, especially for the diehards that made it to the end. I am wrapping up the Dipsadded book right now. I talked with my publisher last night, and I am in need of photographs. As many photographs as I can get. They need to be 300 DPI. So, if you're taking pics with your cell phone, you can set your cell phone up to take a picture like that. But if you just take like a really nice picture with your cell phone, I may not actually be able to use it for the book. But if it's at that size, we're good. But I need pictures of Barron's racers, Boiruna maculata, the false Musarana or Musarana. If Jen Joseph, brown Musaranas. If you have those, send those pictures too. Tricolor hognose snakes, false water cobras, and Liophis and Erythrolampris. If you send me a pic and I use it, you will get name recognition in the photograph caption in the book. And you'll make it in the acknowledgement section. And I will absolutely make sure that happens. So I thought it would be best to reach out to our listeners. And I know that we have some Dipsadded fans here as well. If you need to get a hold of me, reach out to me on Facebook, just Zach Loafman. And then on Instagram, you can find me at Dr. Crawdad. And if you want to get a hold of Matt, where can they find you?
You can find me on Facebook with Sarpamitra, as well as Instagram with Sarpamitra USA.
All righty. So one more episode down. Matt and I are throwing around some ideas for the next one. And I'm certain, we'll divulge that when you're listening to it. So without further ado, have a great day, night, whatever time it is. Have a good one.